There is a darkness that doesn't freeze. It suffocates, it rots, it swallows you whole, leaving absolutely nothing behind. Not a body, not a boot, not a single bone. In 1925, the world's most renowned explorer, Colonel Percy Fawcett, walked into the uncharted depths of the Amazon rainforest. He wasn't looking for gold. He wasn't chasing glory. He was hunting a ghost, a mythical, ancient metropolis he simply called the City of Z. He took his eldest son, Jack, 22 years old, strong, devoted, and Jack's best friend, Raleigh Rimmel, who had never even been to the jungle before. 3 men against a green hell. They stepped into the dense, suffocating canopy of the Mato Grosso and were never seen again. Welcome to Chronicles of Cold. To understand what drove Percy Fawcett into that jungle, you have to understand who Percy Fawcett was. Because this was not a reckless man. This was not a fool. Born in 1867, Fawcett was a decorated British Army officer, a Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, and arguably the most skilled wilderness surveyor of his era. Between 1906 and 1924, he completed 7 expeditions into South America, surviving rivers no European had charted, negotiating with tribes that had killed every other outsider, and walking out of conditions that should have been fatal. He was the kind of man that made other men feel small just by existing. The Royal Geographical Society trusted him. The British government funded him. Arthur Conan Doyle, yes, the man who created Sherlock Holmes, was so inspired by Fawcett's stories of the Amazon that he wrote The Lost World with him in mind as the model for the protagonist. This was not a lunatic chasing fairy tales. This was a trained, decorated, methodical explorer with a theory. And the theory was terrifying in its plausibility. The idea of the City of Z began with a document, a very specific document. In 1753, a Portuguese explorer filed a report with the colonial government in Bahia, Brazil. The document, now known simply as Manuscript 512, described a ruined city in the interior of South America. Massive stone arches, wide streets, colossal statues, inscriptions in an unknown language, and what appeared to be the remnants of an advanced civilization. A civilization that had vanished without explanation. The document was buried in the National Library of Rio de Janeiro for over 150 years. When Fawcett discovered it in 1906, something inside him shifted permanently. He believed it was real. He believed the Amazon, far from being an empty wilderness, had once been home to a sophisticated, organized pre-Columbian civilization so advanced it had been deliberately erased from history. And here's the unsettling part. Modern archaeology has started to agree with him. In recent decades, researchers using satellite imaging and aerial LiDAR technology have discovered traces of enormous, complex settlements hidden beneath the Amazon canopy. Massive earthworks, geometric enclosures, evidence of roads connecting ancient communities. What was once dismissed as the fantasy of a mad Victorian explorer has been quietly, slowly confirmed as something far more real. Percy Fawcett may have been right. He just never lived to know it. But let's return to the jungle, because while Victorian England imagined the Amazon as an exotic adventure, the reality was a living nightmare. The air was thick with malaria, flesh-eating parasites burrowed into their skin. Every step through the knee-deep black mud was a battle against venomous snakes, relentless insects, and a paralyzing fever-inducing heat that could drive a man to absolute madness. The Mato Grosso, the region where Fawcett was headed, translates from Portuguese as dense forest, which is almost laughably understated. The interior of that region in 1925 was so remote, so completely uncharted, that there were no maps. There were no supply routes. There were no radio towers, no outposts, no help. If something went wrong out there, nothing would ever come back. Previous expeditions had broken entirely capable men. One of Fawcett's own earlier surveys in 1910 saw his entire team collapse from disease and exhaustion. He had watched men lose their minds slowly, piece by piece, in that green, suffocating dark. And yet he went back, again and again, because Fawcett was obsessed. He had mapped borders, survived starvation, and walked out of places no outsider had ever survived. His obsession had become a kind of religion. His arrogance was his armor. By early 1925, Fawcett had raised enough funding, assembled his small team, and begun the journey into the Mato Grosso. He moved deliberately, cautiously. He dismissed larger escort parties, convinced that a small group could travel faster and attract less hostility from the tribes they would inevitably encounter. On April 20th, he and his two companions crossed into the Brazilian interior, heading toward the upper Xingu River. The terrain was brutal from the beginning. Within weeks, Raleigh Rimmel, the youngest, the least experienced, was already suffering from a severe foot infection, possibly from an insect bite. He was limping. He was slowing them down. He wrote letters home that described exhaustion, insects, and a swollen leg that refused to heal. And still, they moved forward. On May 29, 1925, the trio reached a desolate spot Fawcett had named Dead Horse Camp. He had camped here before on an earlier expedition. It was named after a horse that had died there from the unforgiving conditions years prior. This was the last place where outside contact was possible. Here, surrounded by impenetrable darkness and the sounds of a jungle that never truly goes quiet, Fawcett sent his native guides back. With them, he sent a final letter to his wife, Nina, back in England. His last recorded words were chillingly, almost defiantly confident. "You have no fear of any failure." After that, silence, a silence that has now lasted for a century. When months passed with no word, the world panicked. The Royal Geographical Society waited. Nina Fawcett waited. And then the waiting became unbearable, and the missions began. But the Amazon doesn't give up its secrets easily. In fact, it demanded more blood. In 1928, a commander named George Miller Diet led the first major rescue expedition. He found trace evidence, a trunk that may have been Fawcett's, stories from local tribes about strange foreigners passing through, but no definitive answers. He returned with nothing but questions. In 1932, a Swiss trapper named Stefan Ratten claimed he had encountered an old British man being held captive by an indigenous tribe deep in the interior. He said the man had white hair, was thin as a skeleton, and whispered to him that he was Colonel Fawcett. No rescue mission mounted in response ever confirmed this account. Ratten himself vanished on a second journey, attempting to locate the same tribe. Over the following decades, an estimated 100 people, explorers, journalists, adventurers, and obsessives, died or vanished entirely while attempting to find Percy Fawcett. It became known as the Fawcett Curse, a name that feels almost too small for what it actually represents. A century of men swallowed by the same jungle that took him. So what actually happened? The theories are as terrifying as the jungle itself. The most widely accepted hypothesis is that Fawcett's party was killed by an indigenous tribe, specifically the Kalapalo people, who lived near the Upper Xingu and whose oral histories describe an encounter with foreigners who ignored their warnings and continued east, deeper into territory controlled by far more hostile groups. Kalapalo elders reportedly told early researchers that they watched signal fires from the foreigners' camp for 5 days after they left. And then the fires went dark. 5 days. And then nothing? Other theories are darker. Some researchers believe the party succumbed to starvation and fever, their minds already shattered by infection and exhaustion, wandering blindly through the canopy until they simply stopped. There are no remains because the Amazon leaves no remains. It digests. It recycles flesh, bone, teeth, and steel with breathtaking efficiency until nothing is left but the damp, heavy air. And then there is the whisper that follows Percy Fawcett wherever his name is spoken. The darkest theory of all, that Fawcett didn't die in that jungle, that he chose it, that a man who had spent his entire life finding the edges of the civilized world finally found an edge he didn't want to come back from. That somewhere in the green abyss, he found something, or lost something, and simply never returned. In 1951, a journalist named Orlando Vilas Boas, working in the Xingu region, received bones from a Kalapalo chief who claimed they belonged to Fawcett. They were sent to London, forensically analyzed by the Royal Anthropological Institute, and determined to not match Fawcett's physical profile. The bones were too short, too different, which means the question reopens completely. Whose bones were those? And where are Fawcett's? Unlike the freezing Arctic, the Amazon doesn't preserve its tragedies. It doesn't leave perfectly frozen graves or frantic notes hidden beneath stone cairns. There are no last diary entries, no photographs. The jungle digests. It recycles until nothing is left, until the only thing that remains is the story itself. Percy Fawcett believed he could conquer the green hell. He believed he was different from the men who had failed before him. He believed in Z with a ferocity that outlasted every rational argument against it. Instead, he became part of it. A man who spent his life mapping blank spaces on the earth walked into the last blank space and was erased. The jungle drew him in, folded over him like water, and closed without a ripple. And somewhere out there, beneath a canopy so thick it blocks the sun, in a forest that is actively eating itself and everything that enters it, the answer is still waiting. We just don't know if we want to find it. What do you think is a worse fate? Freezing to death in the eternal Arctic night, or slowly losing your mind to fever in a suffocating jungle where everything, every insect, every microbe, every breath of humid air wants to consume you? Let me know in the comments. And if you have a theory about what really happened to Fawcett, I want to hear it. If you dare to explore more historical nightmares, subscribe to Chronicles of Cold. Every story here is real. Every disappearance is documented. Every darkness is true. Until next time, stay vigilant.